So it's time, we're starting our aspect breakdown analysis, and first up we have Justice. Hello, welcome to Nelson All Over Cards. I'm Nelson, and today we are kicking off a brand new series where we're talking about 5 different archetypes for each of the 4 aspects. We're going to do each one of these videos separately. Today we're focusing on Justice, and then it's going to be capped off with a deck building video which will be referencing these videos. So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss them. Like I said, this video is focused on the best control aspect in the game, which is Justice. We're going to go through some of the main archetypes, what those archetypes do, key cards. We're going to make sure that we have what packs those cards come in, as well as 3 heroes that work really well for that specific strategy. I'm going to try not to double up too much on these hero recommendations, so that's why you may not see some heroes in these lists, but make sure to comment below if there's a hero you like for these archetypes that I don't mention. Each one of the different archetypes are going to be timestamped in the video, so if you want to come back and check a specific one out again, hopefully that makes it a little bit easier. Alrighty, it's time to start. Up first is what I like to call the Big Thwarter. Now this is best for larger player count games because the deck is going to be all focused around removing as much threat as possible. In solo and lower player count games, this can actually almost be too much threat removal, but don't worry, the next archetype solves that issue. The key cards for this are typically going to range on the higher side of the cost curves and are typically going to put in some work. So when building the deck, make sure you're including cards like Power of Justice or playing with a hero that has a pretty decent economy. So these are cards like Crisis Averted, Agile Flight if you have the aerial trait, and For Justice are all staples of this archetype. Crisis Averted is amazing, especially in the higher player count games, because it has the ability to ignore the crisis icon and it can really put in some serious work. If you're running this type of deck, there's a good chance you're always going to be hitting that mental kicker for Justice, either through like a wild resource or if you're running Sense of Justice. Overwatch is also another critical card for this type of strategy, because if you're going to be removing a significant amount of threat already, you might as well double up and maybe remove it from a second scheme, a side scheme, or if there's a scenario with 2 main schemes, Overwatch can be a critical component. The other side of this equation is that there are some heroes that can rely a little bit more heavily on their basic thwart and supplementing that to help remove enough thwart to make sure that the table is safe for everybody else. So if your hero can ready and it can get multiple thwart activations in a turn, then you're definitely going to want to run a Heroic Intuition to bump that stat up, as well as cards like Making an Entrance to get some extra power as well as some potential healing. Justice Served is also an excellent card that can really help out with this angle, so you can get even another activation clearing your way for the teammates to handle the rest of the game. Again, the Big Thwarter strategy is all around threat mitigation to make sure that your teammates, again, not really a solo strategy, can do what they need to do to win you the game, and you're there taking away the problems that are hindering them in their success. Now this last card is a little bit more of a niche card that is crazy if you're at the table with a Guardian and an Avenger. This is Problem Solvers. This card can actually become pretty OP as you exhaust both your hero, or an Avenger and a Guardian character, and then you remove the combined thwart from each scheme in play. So this can be crazy in certain scenarios like Venom Goblin, Red Skull, or other villains that have multiple schemes, but this is one of those that if you know you are going to have a Guardian while you're playing an Avenger or vice versa, it's a card that you probably want to be including in your deck. You can also do this with an ally, but I have found it's a little bit stronger if you are able to do multiple heroes, but also the ally strategy is viable as well. So if you're running like, say, a Guardian hero, you can run a Avengers ally and then get this Problem Solvers activated. So it's a kind of a, panic button hit, clear the area. No, that's a different card. Panic button hit, clear pretty much all the threat on the table, and it can really get you out of some sticky situations. Now let's talk about some of the best heroes for the Big Thwarter archetype. Up first, we have the first Avenger himself, Captain America. Cap has some of the staples really needed for this playstyle. The ability to ready with his I Can Do This All Day ability, his Fearless Determination, which gives him a +1 thwart for the round, bringing his total up to like 4 thwart if you have a Heroic Intuition already on the table, and a ready that I Can Do This All Day gives you 8 threat removal just off the 2 basic activations. He also has a really good economy, allowing you to pay for some of those really high cost threat reduction cards. Cap is an incredible hero for the Big Thwarter. Next up, we have I Am Groot. Groot on the surface does not necessarily look like he would be great at this archetype because of his 1 thwart, but his I Am Groot card can remove up to 10 threat if he's full up on growth counters. His Entangling Vines help boost his thwart activation up by 2 for one of those swings, and then being Guardian traded also helps him give access to the problem solvers at the right table. Groot can be a massive threat reduction force. It just takes a little bit of time to build them up to that. So if you have a table that can handle themselves for maybe a couple of turns and allow you to stay in Alter Ego to build up those growth counters, as long as you have chump blockers, you're not going to lose those growth counters, and you can thwart a lot. And Groot is actually one of the more fun ones to play in this archetype. And then last up, but definitely not least, we have the Cartoon Web Slinger Spider-Ham. His Organic Webbing card bumps him up to a 3 thwart, as well as gives him a built-in ready. That card by himself would have earned him a spot on this list, but that's not all he brings to the table. He has Ham It Up, which can significantly change the game state, as there's no limit to how many counters he can have at one time, allowing for some incredible thwarting potential just off of a 0 cost card. And then just like Cap, he has a great economy with his tune counter mechanism, and so it's going to be pretty easy to get a lot of those really high thwart cards onto the table. Moving on, I promised I would talk about the solo implementation of the big thwarter archetype, which I like to call 0 threat. This is a bit different because there's not as much threat to worry about in solo, or maybe like a 2-player count. So we don't always need cards like Crisis Averted, and instead you have a different problem to figure out, which is how are you going to deal damage to the villain, because you can't rely on your teammates to do that for you. To do that, I like to sub out a lot of these bigger thwart cards for cards that trigger off not having any threat on the main scheme. These are cards like Venom and Pivotal Moment that give you a bonus for doing your job well. So step 1 is to get that threat down on the main scheme to 0, and then throw damage with these types of cards. Sometimes in solo and running the strategy, you can still find yourself with a little bit too much thwart, so sometimes I like to throw in a Swift Retribution into this strategy, which allows for more damage at the cost of a scheme, which the deck build should be able to take care of. The top heroes of this archetype still need some thwarting in their signature kit to make sure that main scheme stays at 0, but also to take care of any side schemes that may pop out. And so with that said, Phoenix is really strong here. While she's restrained, she has 3 thwart, allowing you to almost always keep that main scheme at 0, because you're probably only adding 1 around if you're in hero form. And if you need more threat mitigation, she has Telepathic Trickery. And then when I'm running her in this type of strategy, she has almost enough thwart just in her kit to manage threat. So I don't usually throw too many thwart cards in there, and focus more on filling out her deck with Swift Retributions and Pivotal Moments. Next up is one of my favorite heroes in the game, and that's Quicksilver. Quicksilver has a free ready each phase, so once he has his Heroic Intuition and Hyper Perception out, he gets 2 activations of 3 threat reduction. Usually 1 is going to be good enough, and then you can use that second activation for whatever else you please, but if you need to, you can clear a side scheme and then the main with that free ready. Quicksilver also loves comboing off Justice Serves, getting him to ready yet again, and being able to use Friction Resistance, which is one of the best resource generator cards in the game. Since you have so much thwart potential, you can then let his double time card focus on damage and rely on the other components to rush down that villain pretty quickly. And then finally, you have the Master of Threat Mitigation herself, Black Widow. With her bonus for playing cards like Counterintelligence, and then having access to the soon-to-be Breaking and Entering from the Gambit pack, she can sit in Alter Ego for a while getting set up and then roll up and just swing. She also has cards like Covert Ops, which not only removes 4 threat, but it also confuses the villain, allowing you to keep that main scheme down for multiple turns in a row. Speaking of confusion, that's going to lead us right into our next archetype, which is Confused Lock. This archetype is focused around keeping the villain confused so you or your teammates can safely flip down to Alter Ego. This works in both low and higher player count games. It just changes a little bit of the way that you may play. In a solo game, being able to confuse and then flip down, saving you a turn, allowing you to draw up to that larger hand size, activate any of your Alter Ego abilities, and then flip back up and then rinse, wash, and repeat can be very powerful, as well as confusing so that you don't have to worry about as much threat in a multiplayer game and allowing more than, maybe just one. You can have multiple people flip down and still have safety in that main scheme. This archetype got really strong with the Guardian wave as it gave us access to Sonic Rifle, which is an upgrade that confused twice, as well as Think Fast, which is a one-cost event to take a damage and confuse an enemy, but it is Guardian locked. So if you don't have the Guardian trait, you can also look at cards like Concussive Blow, which have the added benefit of dealing some damage alongside of confusing to get the right kickers. And then this archetype continues to get stronger and better by getting more consistent now that we have Professor X, and then Dazzler, who is just announced that's coming in the Gambit Hero Pack. As a side ability to this archetype, it's kind of like a little sliver. It's my way of getting 6 in here instead of just 5. And this kind of works a little bit better on the 2 or 1 player count games. And that is looking at the cards that we have that can deal damage to confused enemies. And that really is beneficial in solo play when you don't have the aggression player at the table. These are cards like Scare Tactic, which is a card that allows you to deal 3 damage to a confused enemy. Or again, we can talk about Swift Retribution for that extra damage, and then you don't need to worry about the activation, which is the downside to that card. So both of these cards can get you a good chunk of damage for pretty low cost just by having that confused status on the villain. Now, I want to talk about Sonic Rifle one more time here. It can use a charge to deal 3 damage to a confused enemy. However, I very rarely find myself using this option as confused is so much more valuable. But maybe at the end of this game, this could be a good source of damage, especially if you have multiple of them out there. The heroes that work best with the Confused Lock playstyle are those who already have Confused built into their kit and or have really strong alter ego abilities, giving them a reason to flip down as frequently as they can. The king of Confused Lock and honestly just activation lock is Miles Morales' Spider-Man. His spider camouflage ability has Confused built in, and his cards make it pretty easy to trigger it when needed. His constant flipping between hero and alter ego form allows you to shuffle those key cards back into his deck, allowing you to hit it multiple times each deck pass. Adding on to this, he has his Acrobatics card. This 1-cost card deals 2 damage and then 3 extra damage if the target has a Confused card and 3 extra damage if they have a stun card. And so it's basically a better scare tactic. If you are just looking at the Confused card, it does 1 for 5, which is a good chunk of damage. So not only does he get the benefit of canceling a scheme activation, he can capitalize on it just way better than other heroes can. Up next, we have Flash Thompson as Venom. There are a few reasons that Flash can be really solid for this build. First off, he's Guardian traded, which gives him access to Think Fast, which is a just easy, cheap confuse. Also, part of his kit is Behind Enemy Lines, which removes threat as well as confuses it if you pay for his mental resource, which should be really easy with his Symbiotic Bond ability. He can hold the Sonic Rifles with his Armed and Ready ability, but you may be sacrificing a spot for either one of his multi-guns or his pistols, but honestly, with Think Fast and Behind Enemy Lines, Sonic Rifle is not totally needed with Flash, or you could throw in a side holster and just have your cake and eat it too. Finally, last up in the Confused Lock deck, we have Spider-Woman with one of the strongest cards in the entire game, and that's Pheromones. This is a 2-cost card that stuns and confuses an enemy, giving her an incredible ability to confuse. This allows her to flip down and take advantage of her alter ego kit, drawing cards from Jessica Drew's apartment and seeing what's coming up with her alter ego action. Confusing the enemy and flipping down to set up for an epic turn is something Jessica can do very nicely. Up next is the newest Justice archetype on our list, and it really became viable with the Sinister Motives campaign box release, and that's the S.H.I.E.L.D. build. Sinister Motives basically wrapped this archetype up and presented it to us as a gift in a box. It came with all the key cards that you need, like Monica Chang, Sky Destroyer, Field Agent, Agent 13, Dum Dum Dugan, and all the events that combo off with this archetype. It is a pretty slow, but it's an incredibly powerful playstyle that also looks really cool once built because there's going to be upgrades and supports and allies just all over the table. You're going to need a big table for this archetype because you really feel like you are bringing the full force of S.H.I.E.L.D. when playing. The build revolves around the S.H.I.E.L.D. trait and using cards like Sky Destroyer and Agent 13 to really capitalize on those plays. So Sky Destroyer here deals 2 damage when a S.H.I.E.L.D. card is played, while Agent 13 can ready a S.H.I.E.L.D. support which includes Sky Destroyer after attacking or thwarting. If you combo this with a Field Agent who reduces her consequential damage, you can basically have Agent 13 on the table the entire game. Now Sky Destroyer is a great ready, but you can also target cards like Helicarrier to help you build or other supports to get a lot of mileage out of them. Monica Chang is one of my favorite designs in the entire game, just because it made an old card so much more relevant. So Monica, whenever she enters play, you get to go get a copy of Surveillance Team and put it into play, and then add a counter to all your surveillance teams. And that right there, after a few plays of Monica, can pretty much handle threat as a solo player for the rest of the game, and you can focus on damage out after that. In multiplayer, you can use cards like Homeland Intervention to help with even more threat. Then this strategy is all kind of capped off with Dum Dum Dugan, who can carry the team to victory once you're built, and he can easily be swinging for like 6 damage off 1 activation, making that final stage of a villain a cakewalk. Now the heroes are pretty agnostic to the build here. But heroes with the shield trait or shield cards in their kit can get a little bit more mileage out of the build. So we'll talk about War Machine first. So War Machine has the shield trait on his alter ego side, but he also carries the munitions bunker, which can be ready by Agent 13. I just did a theoretical build about this because I thought it was kind of funny. Because you can ready munition bunker with Agent 13, you can load up a significant amount of ammo counters on the munition bunker. So when you flip back up, you have a huge amount of damage that you can throw down. Instead of flipping up with like maybe 9 counters, now you're flipping up with 15 counters, and you can do just a lot more with that type of flexibility. Following up War Machine, we have Hawkeye, who's shield traded on his alter ego side as well. Outside of the needed threat mitigation that the shield style can provide, he can save Mockingbird, his signature ally, with field agents, which allows him to keep a solid thwarter on the table, as well as keeping her on the table for the exact time she needs to trigger that interrupt ability. And then finally, we have Captain Marvel, who can get pretty silly with readying her Alpha Flight Station. Similar to the strategy with War Machine, she can continuously ready Alpha Flight Station and Alter Ego and give her a significant amount of card draw. She also has a really epic economy, and so with her energy absorption resource cards, that can help get some of the more expensive pieces of this archetype onto the table quickly. Also, really quick honorable mention here for Spider-Woman, as she's also excellent in this archetype because she can get shield cards from other aspects. My favorite is probably leadership, so you have access to Maria Hill, you have access to command teams, Triskelion, all of these shield cards that are in the blue aspect, but I had to determine and make the call to put her here or the Confused Lock section, and she's incredible in Confused Lock, and so I put her there, but I also decided to cheat and mention her here as well. And then lastly, this is the strongest archetype for solo play, and I just call it the One Way or Another build. I'm sure there's probably a better name out there for it, but this build is all centered around that one card, One Way or Another, which has you search for a side scheme, you reveal that side scheme, and draw 3 cards. The card itself is a really good card, really powerful card, but also Justice gives you all the tools to exploit it. So you have cards like Skilled Investigator and Clear the Area that allow you to draw even more cards after taking care of the problem you brought to the table. While cards like Turn the Tide, Chance Encounter, and Followed reward you for taking out that side scheme. The reason this works way better in solo is because there's not as much threat on that scheme. Typically, if you bring it out in a 4-player game, the 3 cards are not going to be enough to offset the threat that is placed onto that card. However, in solo, you should have no issue with taking out that threat that you put on the table. The other cards that I wanted to highlight for this archetype are Jessica Jones, who increases her thwart power based on how many side schemes are out there, making an entrance, which helps you clear most side schemes in a solo game, and then Justice Serves, which gets you that ready after you solve the problem that you brought out. This archetype is really good for heroes that have strong signature cards because it helps you draw and pay for those sooner. And there are so many heroes that can benefit from this strategy, so much so that like when I'm doing my hero spotlight videos, I intentionally do not build to this strategy because it is so powerful in solo play that I like to try and highlight other ways to build out characters that I don't just go to one way or another every single time. But I've narrowed it down to 3, and here they are. Wolverine is incredible with this. Because of his Tracked by Scent card, it's like a souped up Clear the Area. It removes 3 threat and draws 2 cards rather than 2 in 1. Combine this with his basic thwart of 2, and that takes care of pretty much any side scheme in solo play. There are a couple of them that I can think about, but also maybe don't grab those with One Way or Another. Also, Wolverine's cards are incredibly powerful, so the faster you can draw into them, the better off you're going to be. Next up is my favorite hero for this build, and that's Nova. Nova doesn't have the best thwart stat, but his Unleash the Nova Force allows you to go crazy with side schemes. If you pull one out, defeat it, you get a free ready and a card draw. This can lead to some incredibly strong and fun turns if you can set it up correctly. I think in the first game that I played with Nova in Justice, I was able to get the villain down to like 4 health remaining on stage 2. I was playing on standard. So I did like 20 something damage on one turn just because I had so many cards in my hand. And then finally we have Nova's paired release Ironheart. Ironheart is a incredible thwarter. She could probably fit in any of these archetypes, but I chose her for this because of a few reasons. She gets a 3 thwart stat in her final form. That combined with fly over, that allows you to take care of pretty much all the side schemes. Typically you can split that up and even kill the main and a side scheme that comes out. And then if that wasn't enough, she has propulsion jets that allow you to remove up to 3 threat every turn once you're built out. Her cards are so incredibly strong. So once you get to that version 3, one way or another is just basically a card that helps you win this turn rather than next turn. So those are the highlights of the 5 Justice archetypes that I wanted to talk about, as well as key cards and heroes that fit with that play strategy. If I missed any of the archetypes that you really like to play, or some of the heroes or some of the key cards that slot into some of these, let me know in the comments. I love to read them, and it'll be really great for people reading in the future to see some of the new cards or cards that I may have missed to talk about and build their decks going forward. Thank you so very much for hanging out. I appreciate you all. Hope you have a fantastic time playing some Marvel Champions. Let me know how these archetypes work for you. And until next time, peace.